everyone, and welcome to the first of the Oregon Justice Resource Center's candidate forums, focusing on some of this month's key races. My name is Alice Landell. I'm the Director of Communication for the organization, and today we're taking a look at the Washington County District Attorney's race. We have two candidates vying for election to become DA in Oregon's second largest county. I'm sorry to say that the incumbent DA, Kevin Barton, who is running for re-election, has declined our invitation to join us today. But we're very glad to have the challenger in this race, Brian Decker, with us to answer your questions. In a moment, we're going to hear from Mr. Decker, but first, I want to say that the goal of these forums is to help voters learn more about candidates who, if elected, will be important players in our criminal, legal, and punishment systems. So if you attend our forum Monday at 4 p.m. on the City Commissioner's race in Portland, you'll notice that we will be focusing that event specifically on policing and criminal justice, and not on other aspects of the role of commissioner. We will have Commissioner Joanne Hardesty and candidates Vadim Mazersky and Rene Gonzalez in attendance on Monday. And you can find information about how to sign up for that forum and for our final event on the Court of Appeals race on our social media. The other thing I do want to say, turning back to the issue of district attorneys, is that we as an organization don't necessarily believe that there is a version of prosecution or a way of running a district attorney's office, no matter how progressive, that is going to avoid all harm to our communities, and especially to the most vulnerable members of our communities. Safety for all of us is going to come from living in a society where we all have our needs met, our basic needs of good housing, food, education, healthcare, and the rest. A society where we can all flourish in our individual ways. That's not to say, however, that there aren't meaningful differences between candidates for district attorney. There are, and if you can vote in the Washington County DA race or any other, you should be asking searching questions of the candidates and trying to figure out how they will run things if they win. If you're not familiar with our organization, we are the Oregon Justice Resource Center. We're a nonprofit law firm. We were founded in 2011, and we provide free legal services to Oregonians, specifically people in prison and people whose civil rights have been violated. We have a group of legal programs operating under one roof, which share administrative costs so they can put more resources into serving clients. And you can learn more about us at our website, ojrc.info. As a 501c3, OJRC does not endorse candidates for election. Members of our staff have sometimes, including in this election cycle, endorsed candidates in their personal capacity. As a person moderating this conversation and our candidate forum on Monday, I can say I have not and I will not endorse in either this Washington County DA race or the City Commissioner's race. Now for the rules. As attorneys who work across many different aspects of the criminal legal system and the prison system, we have plenty questions of our own for district attorney candidates. We also want to make this an event where you can get your questions answered. So if you're in the webinar with us on Zoom, you can send your questions to us in the Q&A. And alternatively, if you're watching on YouTube, you can add your questions there, or you can tweet at us at OJR Center. I'd encourage you to stick to questions rather than statements, please, and to keep your questions as straightforward as you can so that we can get through as many as possible this afternoon. So let's begin welcoming Brian Decker, and thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. How are you, Brian?
I'm great. Thank you so much for being here and for having this forum available to educate voters about this really crucial race.
Thank you. Well, let's help people out who aren't familiar with you yet. Can you just give us a little about who you are, your professional background, experience, and why you want to be the next DA in Washington County?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, my name is Brian Decker. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm running for district attorney in Washington County. I was a federal prosecutor during the Obama administration, and I have been a public defender here in Washington County for about 4.5 years. And I'm running for district attorney because I believe that we need a change. Here in Washington County, gun violence is up. community trust in the criminal justice system is down, and the status quo isn't doing enough to address the root causes of crime. And then on top of that, victims and survivors are not getting the support they need from the real harm that happens to them. Having worked as a lawyer on all sides of the criminal legal system, I am able to see the way that it works and the fixes that it needs, and the ways that right here in Washington County it is failing. And I'm able to see that from many perspectives. When I was a public defender, I was helping poor adults and children accused of crimes get access to justice, helping them navigate the court system, helping them protect their constitutional rights. And as a federal prosecutor, I was taking on crimes like human trafficking, gun trafficking, destruction of natural resources. And what I've learned over the course of my career is that prosecutors, district attorneys as the elected heads in particular, wield immense power. And that power, the power of the decisions that the prosecutors make, can help or it can harm safety and justice in the community. And so what I want to do as district attorney, my priorities that I want to see happen are, number one, I want to prioritize prevention. I've seen so many cases of people in the criminal justice system who have an underlying issue like addiction or mental illness or homelessness or just poverty in general. And unfortunately, these are problems that in many cases, when we don't treat them out in society, they end up with following people into the criminal justice system. I believe that smart public safety policy means preventing crimes before they occur, rather than just responding to things after the fact. And that means getting out in front of these problems. It also means rehabilitating nonviolent people away from criminal behavior and away from incarceration. I also stand for serving victims. I believe that people who have been harmed deserve a voice in our justice system, no matter who they are, no matter how messy their background is. I also want to prioritize equal justice for all. I believe it's essential to enforce the highest ethical standards in the office of the district attorney and address racial discrimination to make sure that everyone is treated equally. And then finally, I believe in real public safety and real accountability. I don't want to see anybody get special treatment. Nobody is above the law. Doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how well connected you are. Everybody should be treated with equal human dignity, and everybody should be held accountable for their actions. I know that these are big problems, and this is change that I can't make happen by myself. And so that's why my philosophy about this is to be a collaborative leader. I know that engaging with communities, particularly the communities that experience more harm than others from both crime and from the criminal justice system, is going to be an essential part of getting things done. And I believe that when we work together, we can build a system of true justice and real safety that works for everyone and moves us forward.
One of the key ways that typically people tend or have tended to measure whether a DA's office is successful or not is conviction rates. There has been a tendency to say, well, a high conviction rate, that means the DA's office is doing a good job. We would argue that conviction rates aren't necessarily a great way of testing whether the community is actually getting healthier and happier and safer. So I'm curious to know, how would you assess the success of your office if you're elected?
Well, I agree with that. I think that conviction rates are a pretty poor proxy for safety. I mean, nobody walks outside in their neighborhood and either says, this feels like a safe neighborhood, there must be a pretty high conviction rate at the district attorney's office, or this, I don't feel safe here, so they must not be getting enough convictions. That doesn't make any sense. And in particular in Washington County, if all we're doing is measuring things in terms of the conviction rate in the trial court, In the long run, Washington County District Attorney's Office under Kevin Barton has a history of having those convictions overturned at the Court of Appeals. They don't even stick around long enough to have lasting effect. They do harm for a period of years, and then they have to come back down to the trial court and start all over again because they weren't able to get it right the first time and have the conviction stick. No, I think that measuring safety means looking at other objective measures that are going to have a greater impact on what people actually experience in the community. And one key one is the rate of recidivism, the rate of people reoffending after they go through the system. After they complete the sentence and get out of the criminal justice system, the rate at which people are arrested a year later or 3 years later. And that rate is higher in Washington County than in any other county in the metro area. I believe that's because we're not doing enough here to focus on rehabilitating people. We shouldn't have people coming back through the system again and again and again. If they're going to be involved in the justice system, let's try to get it right the first time and get them access to the help that they need. Let's get access to help that is easily accessible, trauma-informed, culturally competent, and based in evidence, which is to say effective, and get it to them earlier and maximize that for people so that we can reduce that rate of recidivism and see real success in not having people stuck in this endless loop.
So what do you think about how Washington County is managing the balance right now in terms of spending on prosecution? Voters have a bunch of different priorities, including prevention of crime, right? Not just responding to crime afterwards through prosecuting people. Is the county spending enough on prosecution, too much, the right amount? How do you feel about where the balance sits there versus what you're talking about, some of these other things like programs that will help to prevent recidivism, which hopefully mean that down the line we need fewer prosecutions?
Well, I think that's right. I want to see our tax dollars allocated in a way that is going to promote public safety. And because I see public safety as greater than just measured in the number of convictions in the trial courts, I think that we need to be devoting our resources to programs that are going to help get out in front of some of these problems that are driving people into the criminal justice system, which means we need to rebuild a social safety net that has been neglected for years, year over year. Now, I have been critical in the past of the way that Kevin Barton's district attorney's office has clamored for more and more of our tax dollars and expanded the budget of the district attorney's office 29% in just his first 3 years in office, which is way out of proportion to population growth. Where are those tax dollars going? Well, Kevin Barton himself is the highest paid district attorney in the state. His top two deputies, the chief deputy district attorneys, he's given them $50,000 raises, and they are now the second and third highest paid public employees of Washington County. And he's, spent tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars on advertising and public relations for the office. And what results are we seeing for these investments? Well, we have an increased rate of youth charged as juvenile delinquents. The rate at which youth are charged as juvenile delinquents, as opposed to being diverted into community service or some other diversion, is up 53% over Kevin Barton's term in office. He has made us become the most punitive county in the state, sending more people to Oregon's prisons for more years than any other county. And in the meantime, the result of all of that is the highest recidivism rate in the metro area. We're not actually seeing the results that are gonna promote safety in the community because of those investments. So I'd like to see a greater investment in the things that are going to make us safer in the community and less of this wasteful inefficiency in the prosecutor's system.
We're in the middle of what the Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court has called a crisis in our public defense system. And as you mentioned, you have worked as a public defender in Washington County and generally in the Portland metro area. The crisis does seem to be particularly acute. We've seen in Washington County, the state's largest public defense firm has stopped taking most new felony and misdemeanor cases for a while because they simply can't cope with more cases. We've seen Kevin Barton blaming public defenders in the media for not showing up to do their jobs. This is a situation which many people have to be involved in solving this. But as a district attorney, one option is to cut back on prosecutions of less serious offenses. Is that something that you would commit to doing or consider doing? Do you think that as DA that you could play a role in addressing this crisis?
Well, I think it is a crisis, and it's a crisis of our constitutional rights. So I don't think we should be taking options off the table to solve it. It's true that in the courtroom, prosecutors and defense attorneys are adversaries on any particular case, but outside of the courtroom, we ought to be collaborative partners in making our criminal justice system work well for everybody. We ought to be working together. We ought to be working with the courts and other stakeholders in our system to make sure that it is a system that is just, that keeps us safe, and that protects people's constitutional rights. And right now, the system is failing at protecting people's constitutional rights because we have this crisis with too few public defenders and overworked. So I believe that district attorneys have a role to play in making sure that the system works efficiently. Before I get to the step of saying, we need to just decide to not charge cases that otherwise we would be charging, what I want to look at first is how can we more efficiently move through the cases that we have? And part of the problem here in Washington County is we've got individuals who we know need to get access to treatment services or housing services, and they're waiting around in jail for months. They're going to 5 different court hearings, and then ultimately, if they're lucky, they get to sign on a plea agreement, and in exchange for that, they will get access to the treatment services that they need. Well, I think we ought to be moving these cases a lot quicker, getting our jails no longer so overcrowded and getting our court systems no longer so overtaxed by getting people into the services earlier on in the chain. And if we can do that, then we can lighten the caseload on everybody's desks.
I've got a question here from Karen, who's joining us in the webinar today. And she says, hi, Brian, how does being pro-choice affect your role as district attorney? I mean, obviously this week with the news that's come out of the US Supreme Court and with these concerns, not necessarily in Oregon, but elsewhere about the potential for the criminalization of people who seek abortions or who help others to seek abortions or carry out abortions. This is a very timely kind of question. So how does it affect your role as DA? How does it play into that?
Well, that's right. Being pro-choice, I think, is an essential part for the qualifications of a district attorney. We need to be sure that we are protecting people's constitutional rights, and those include reproductive rights, including to abortion. District attorneys are the ultimate line of defense in protecting folks' constitutional rights in the criminal courts. And so you have the question of who is the person who ultimately makes the decision, if abortion becomes criminalized, am I going to charge people for going and seeking abortions? Am I going to charge doctors for performing abortions? Well, for me, the answer is absolutely no. Absolutely no. To charge those things is antithetical, I believe, to people's constitutional rights and a sense of bodily autonomy. If you are serious about protecting people from violence to their bodies, then I don't see how you can come to any other conclusion. But even before, the last few days have made so clear about how real this threat is, I was very proud to have the endorsement of Pro-Choice Oregon, and talking to that organization and the people who are involved in protecting people's reproductive rights, including the right to abortion. We have had conversations about how very real the threat is of, even here in Oregon, people going to clinics to exercise their rights, experiencing real violence or real threats of violence from protesters clashing at these clinics. And that is something that a district attorney has to be tuned into and has to be addressing in their community to make sure that people are protected.
Thanks, Brian. One, perhaps the most challenging situations that a district attorney can deal with is when there is a police shooting, including when somebody dies in that incident. What we've typically seen is great difficulty and a very rare situation where anyone actually faces consequences as a police officer involved in one of those incidents. We particularly have seen a problem in our state with police shootings of people in mental health crisis. What is your take on those cases as a district attorney? How would you try to address those kinds of situations? Do you believe you have to rely on a grand jury to indict police officers? Are you willing to bring in people from outside of the office to investigate those situations if there's a concern about the close relationship between prosecutors and between police and the county? I mean, how would you plan to handle those kind of situations?
Well, that's right. This is such a difficult issue because of that close relationship between district attorneys and prosecutors. The district attorneys and police. The prosecutor's office relies on a working relationship with law enforcement because the police are going to be our witnesses in all, pretty much every case. The police are going to be the investigators that we rely on and say, can you please go talk to these people? Can you please go gather this evidence for a case? And that builds an effective working relationship. The problem is when that working relationship becomes so cozy that now the people that the police as prosecutors, you have an inherent bias to give them the benefit of the doubt when you're examining their accountability for their actions that you wouldn't be giving to other people who are in the out group. And I believe that we need to be holding everybody accountable equally. The same benefit of the doubt should apply to everyone, regardless of whether you're a police officer or not a police officer, regardless of how well connected or not you are. And so in order to interrupt that inherent bias and that cozy relationship, yes, I think that it's a good start to talk about in these really tragic, most serious cases where people are shot and killed by police, to talk about those cases being investigated by either specially appointed outside prosecutors or by the state attorney general's office in order to have an additional layer of separation from the local DA's office that works with that local law enforcement agency all the time. But I'd go further, because it's not just those cases that are thankfully relatively rare. It is the cases that are more routine, that happen on a daily or weekly basis, where people aren't necessarily killed, but experience use of force by police, or whether it's violence on the job, domestic violence, all sorts of things, where police officers end up being the people who are considered for possible prosecution. And when it comes to those more routine cases, we still need prosecutors who are isolated from that cozy working relationship to make the decision, which is why I think we need to have somebody in the local district attorney's office who specializes in investigating those cases. And so it therefore has that additional layer of inoculation from otherwise working with people and promoting that sort of bias.
We're running low on time, so I do want to get through as many questions as we can. So I'm going to ask you to keep your answers from here on out reasonably brief so that we can get through a few of them. I appreciate all the detail, believe me, but just to try to get through a few.
This is the lightning round. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do the points double? Okay.
Yeah. So one thing that I've noticed throughout this campaign season, the current district attorney, Kevin Barton, he's called Portland a bogeyman. He's made references to not wanting to see Washington County turn into Portland and kind of drawing contrast between what he, I believe, perceives to be problems in Portland that he doesn't want to see in Washington County. Do you similarly, want to maintain a distance between Portland and Washington County, or what is your take on that?
Well, I think that rhetoric is pretty weird when we've got like a third of the people in Washington County have Portland addresses and think of themselves as Portlanders. But it's the old-fashioned fear rhetoric of old-fashioned crime politics. I'm pretty focused on Washington County and trying to make Washington County the best that it can be. Do I look over at Multnomah County and learn some lessons on what to do and what not to do? Sure, just as I look at, Deschutes County and places across the state and across the country that have innovated and tried to break from the failures of historically the criminal justice system. And I think that there's ways to do it and ways to try something different than what we've seen, meet some success and also some failures in some of these other places.
We got a question this week on Twitter, which is about one of your campaign contributions. And I believe the OPB have also reported on this. So you got campaign contributions totaling, I believe, $225,000 from a gentleman named Aaron Boonshoft. He lives in Portland. He's also chief petitioner for a ballot measure, which is trying to qualify for the November ballot, which would decriminalize sex work in Oregon. So the question that we got was, do you think that decriminalizing or legalizing, those are two different things, sex work is a good idea? Is there anything that you would plan to do as district attorney to ease the enforcement of crimes that are related to sex work? And what's really your relationship to Mr. Boonshoft?
Okay, so there's a few questions there. So Mr. Boonshoft and I connected about this race, and what we discussed was honestly his concern about this issue at Coffee Creek Prison, where a nurse, Tony Klein, allegedly sexually assaulted dozens of women there. And Mr. Boonshoft was very concerned about the mishandling of that case by the Washington County District Attorney's Office and their early decision to not prosecute the case based on their belief that nobody would believe the women because they were felons. My understanding is that the work that Mr. Boonshoft was related to regarding decriminalization of sex work is no longer on the ballot or has been postponed or something like that. So I haven't looked into the specifics, or am I aware of any specific proposal that is on the table right now. So I don't really have a position on supporting or opposing something like that.
Okay. What about protest cases? So we as an organization, we do often represent protesters in various civil cases. And with the question that we've had come in was, how would you prosecute or not protesters?
Same as everybody else. I think if you commit a crime, then you're going to be held accountable for it. And if you're not committing a crime, then you're not. I don't think that we need to be discriminating against people based on their viewpoint, on whether we like what they're protesting or we don't like what they're protesting. I do think that violent crime people need to be held accountable for it. I think property crime is separate from violent crime, but people also need to be held accountable for it because it harms other people. I do believe that in every case, whether we're talking about protest case or any other case involving property or violent crime, 9 times out of 10, that accountability ought to look like rehabilitation. And how can we help this person get access to the services that they need to address their underlying problems and make sure that this harm doesn't repeat itself?
Well, we're almost out of time now, really, Brian. So I do want to invite you, if there's any final statement you want to make or any final message that you'd like to leave people with, then feel free to share that now before we wrap up.
Well, thank you. I just want to thank you so much for taking this time. It is an incredibly important position of district attorney. I've been honored to discuss a bit more of the details about it. It is a down ballot race. You don't necessarily think about it on a day-to-day basis, but it really impacts people across the county. So I just want to encourage everybody to really take a look at it, dive into it in terms of the issues that impact you and your values, and vote in this election by May 17th.
Thank you so much, Brian Decker. As we've mentioned, candidate for Washington County District Attorney. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for our forum. We're grateful to you for sharing more with us about your campaign and your plans if you are elected DA. I'd also like to thank Abel Cosentino from Signing Resources and Interpreters for providing our interpretation services this afternoon. Special thanks to everyone who sent us questions. My final thought is just to say, and kind of echoing what Brian said, we would say district attorneys are the most powerful actors in the justice system. You get a choice this time in Washington County, which often you do not, because many DAs will run unopposed. So please research the candidates, think about them, make sure you do vote, because your decision will have a huge impact on your neighbors who are impacted by the legal and punishment systems in Oregon. You can join me again Monday at 4 p.m. It will also be on Zoom. We'll be having another candidate forum. I'll have with me the top 3 candidates for Portland City Commissioner position number 3. So they are Joanne Hardesty, the present commissioner, as well as 2 of her challengers, Vadim Mazirski and Renee Gonzalez. We're going to focus that forum strictly on policing and justice system issues. That's our area of expertise. So we're going to keep the questions on that, but feel free to send questions into us for those candidates on social media. I want to try and get through as many as we possibly can. But thanks to everyone for joining us. I'll see you Monday. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.